In this lesson, we are going to use something called curves. Now, just in case you've heard one or two things about curves, all the rumours you heard are true. Curves are the professional's choice. Curves are incredible. Sell one of your kidneys and go and live as a hermit because the answer is here. Curves! Okay, perhaps I'm getting just a little bit either hysterical or cynical depending upon where you're coming from, but for a long time I was taught myself that curves were the ultimate tool for controlling both tone and colour balance. Now it's true, curves are extremely flexible and curves can give you really precise control over your pictures. But they can be tricky to use, and it's very easy to lose control of them and make a mess of your picture if you don't know the basic techniques. Well, okay, let's give you the basic techniques. I'll use this black and white photo to show you the general principles. And if you get some good information out of this, there's 24 more hours of good information where this video comes from, and that is the craft of Photoshop, solid foundations. Click on the link below to go and enroll on the course. Right, let's get started. Now, there's various places you can find curves. One is our standard image adjustments, and there you are, there's curves. That will operate directly on the pixels of this layer, but by now you and I both know about non-destructive image editing, so we won't use that. The next place to use it is, well, we have an adjustment layer, curves. And because it's an adjustment layer, it's non-destructive. All right, well, I'll leave that there for now. Just to let you know, the other place you can find them, and I will convert my background layer to a smart object. And by now you know that whenever I do that, chances are I'm going to come to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and we've been mainly in the Basic tab. What about there? There's our curves with its own tab, but it doesn't have as many controls as the adjustment layer. So we will cancel this, and instead we will come to our adjustment layer, and I think the sensible thing to do is to start off by showing you the overall principles behind curves. Curves are like a set of watchmaker's tools for fine-tuning the tone and the colour balance of your picture. And if your window is like this, you're trying to use a set of watchmaker's tools wearing boxing gloves. It just doesn't work. So, big as possible, thank you very much. So what can you see? By default, you can see a box with a histogram of the various different tones of your picture in the background. You get grid lines at 25, 50 and 75%, and you get this diagonal line. So far, so what, it's all confusing. But this is actually a graph. You get your before tones lying along the bottom, and you get your after tones running up the side. Now at the moment, that white line running diagonally, bottom left to top right, that's our curve, and yes, I know it's not a curve, it's a line. That's because we haven't done anything yet. Well, what I will do is, I'll add a point to this curve, I will drag it up, and then I'll explain to you what you just saw. Adding a point now, and dragging it up now. Did you see how things suddenly got much brighter? Okay, so what's happening here is, all of the pixels that make up my picture that are exactly 50% bright lie on this line here, this 50% line. So what I did was to put a point at 50% brightness and drag that point up from 50% on my after line to 75% on my after line. Now what I mean by that is all the pixels that are 50% bright were just sitting on this line minding their own business, and then I made the change to the curve. So what they said was, oh right boss, so you want us to be a different tone now? No problem. They travel up the 50% line until they meet the curve, and then they go off to the right and read off their new value. In this case, it's 75%. So all of the pixels that were 50% bright are now 75% bright. But what about all the pixels that were 25% bright? They did the same thing. They said, we've got to change our brightness. So all the 25% bright pixels went up the 25% line until they hit the curve, and they got to, what would you say that is? Maybe about 40%, and they go off to the left as before, read off their new value, which is about 40%. So now all the pixels that were 25% bright are now 40% bright. What about the pixels that were 75% bright? They do the same thing. They travel up the 75% bright line until they hit the curve, then they go across and they read off their value, and in that case it's about what, 90% would you say, along the after axis? And all the pixels that were 75% bright are now 90% bright. And of course, I hope it goes without saying that every single pixel travels up the curve line, reads its new value, and as a result, the whole picture gets brighter. Okay, let me reset this. I can come down to my reset button, or I can click on the point itself and press delete. Or if I had another point somewhere like this, for example, and I wanted to get rid of it, I can just drag it off to the side and it snaps away. Also bear in mind, you can drag the starting point and the end point of the curve like this, for example. See? So now I can drag it pretty much like I dragged my level slider to set my new white point. Incidentally, for a quick bonus point, although we don't get bonus points on the course, I'm just wondering if you can read that histogram. And what I mean by that is you can look at this spike of dark pixels here and say, well, which bit of the picture is that? And of course the answer to that is, well, it's these dark shirts. That's what's creating this massive dark pixels. And at the other end of the scale, you have this massive white pixels. That's going to be the wall behind. But then you get this little spike of pixels at about, what is that, 60% brightness, would you say, to start off with? That's most likely going to be the skin tones. Speaking of which, you saw me drag the end point of the curve along like this. Now, that helped raise the brightness, but I'm starting to get some rather washed out highlights here, especially on this face of the boy in the middle. And so I do have the option of putting in a control point and dragging down a bit. That is helping. But so far you could be forgiven for thinking, well, okay, this is all very well, but how is this really different from levels? Because I've got what? 1, 2, 3 different points that I can move around. Well, I already have that in levels. No, the beauty of curves is that you can have more than one point. So I'm going to take this point and I'm going to press delete to get rid of it, because another nice tool with this, you see this one here? It's like a little finger with a pair of arrowheads sliding up and down. I'm going to click on that and I'm going to come to this area of the boy, just to the left of the lightest point of his face. And when I do that, take a look at the curve. Can you see that little circle just at the top of the curve? If I move my little eyedropper icon around, you can see it moves around. It's showing me what the tones are in the particular place where I'm sampling colour from. Even nicer, if I click and hold with my left mouse button and drag down, the curve gets dragged down with it. And can you see that? I'm starting to reveal detail in the highlighted areas of that boy's face and the other people's faces that I didn't even know was there. And that's giving me a really precise amount of control. Okay, so far so good. I controlled the highlights, but I've got a problem with this. If I make the curves invisible for just a second, you can see I got a bit more control in the highlighted areas, but if I apply it again, the darker parts of my picture have got much darker. And the reason for that is this is just a curve. You put down a control point on any curve and drag it around, the entire curve will be affected. And in this case, you can see the bottom part of my curve has gone lower. One of the single biggest problems with curves is trying to stop them from running out of control. To fix that, it's actually quite simple. I'm just going to place another point and drag it back up so that my curve goes back to the default line. That's that little black line you can see running bottom left to top right. I drag back to there, and that little point I've just created is known as an anchor point. It's anchoring the curve to where it should be. And they are all very well and good, but they have their own problems. Look, imagine I put another point, say around 50%, because I decided I want to lower the mid-tones. You can see as soon as I start to lower it, the curve behind my anchor point starts to rise up. So I will drag off to the side to get rid of that new point, and I'll add another anchor point a little further down. When you are putting down anchor points, sometimes you need to put down more than one. I've got my anchor points there. I'm going to move this one up a little bit like this, and I'm going to take this one and I'm going to delete it. Instead, look, I've still got my curve modifier pointer. I'm going to come to a darker area. Let's try, say, just this bit of the t-shirt where you can see a little bit of detail, but not too much. It's still very dark. And you can see where I'm about to place my point on my curve. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag up slightly like this. Just a little bit. And you can see when I did that, I suddenly started raising some of the detail in the shadow areas. And so far I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points that make up this curve. That's 2 more points than you got with, say, the levels adjustment layer. And that's the point of curves. You can put as many points as you want and you get fine control over the various different parts of your picture like this. And it's all about tinkering with the tonal values of this picture to get as close as possible the exact result that I want. Now, if you find yourself wanting to read a curve, you see this segment of the curve here? That is steeper than the default 45-degree line. If your curve is steeper along that section, you will get more contrast. And if you compare that with, say, look, I'll show you a very common mistake that people make with this. They make too extreme an adjustment like this, and that particular section here, where the curve has suddenly gone very flat, that's where you get less contrast. And look at the shadow on that boy's face, these people's faces as well. It's become a featureless, dead grey. That's because the tones from, let's exaggerate it to show you what I mean. The tones from there to about there are all now the exact same brightness, and that's why you're getting this field of grey on the picture. In general, you make your curve too shallow, you're getting all kinds of problems. Even more interestingly, and I use that phrase advisedly, you can get something like this kind of reverse curve. That's where now these tones here that used to be lighter are now darker, and these tones here, which used to be darker, are now lighter. So you get this inverted effect. And it's Stanley Kubrick 2001 all over again. So I'm going to do my picture a favour and get rid of that control point. I'll close it up. I think we've managed to cover all of the concepts, the advantages and the gotchas with this. I'll just show you the picture before, which is looking quite crude by comparison. And then if I add the curves layer again, you can see I've managed to pull out a lot more detail in both the highlight area and the shadow area, as well as giving the picture an overall boost in lightness. But the thing about curves is, as well as giving you very fine control over the tonal qualities of your picture, dark to light, it also gives you a great amount of fine control over the color balance of your picture. And the color balance is what we'll be talking about in the next section coming straight up. This picture has a few problems. For starters, it's way too bright. The clouds and that boy's white t-shirt are looking a little bit too blown out. But also there's a distinct red colour cast to the shadows. That stone should be more neutral in tone. Believe me, I know. If you look just to the left of that boy, you can see what looks like a tiny village in the background. That's where I was born. I'm just a simple country boy, and I know what colour those stones should be, and they shouldn't look like that. Okay. Let's use curves for this and try and fix the problems using just one adjustment layer, the curves. All right, in general, I think the picture is too bright. Okay, let's move this over a little bit so we can see things and I can zoom in. Let's try and make my box a little bit smaller. There. All right, if I was feeling brave, I suppose I could try and draw and modify the curve like this. But that's braver than I normally am with curves. I can't think of an occasion where I've ever tried to draw in a curve. Instead, I'll come back to my points. If I make some rather extreme changes like that, incidentally, you see that S curve, you will see that all the time when people use curves. This is known as the contrast curve, because what you're doing there is increasing the contrast of the picture. That makes sense because look at this midsection here. It is steeper than that 45-degree line. Remember, we said wherever the curve line is steeper than the default, you get more contrast, but you get to control exactly how much like this. So this is like a contrast slider on steroids. That is a bit extreme. Let's reset that. As with things like levels, you have your black, your mid-grey, and your white point. Let's just try that. Let's try and find something we think should be grey. There you go. There. Did you see that? My main curve didn't change much, but look, I've got this blue line and a red line. What happened there? Well, kind of the main point of this video is, as well as having RGB, which affects all the dark to light values, you can also select the individual color channels. There's a curve for red, which got altered when I set the grey point. You've got green, which didn't get altered at all. And you've got blue, which also got altered. All because I came to my grey point dropper and took a white balance reading inside the picture on those rocks. And at this point, I've got a new word for you. It's a wonderful word, and when you're doing design work, you will find yourself doing this all the time. And the word is assumptionitis. Assumptionitis is where you assume something is true, you base your design decisions off that truth, and you end up making a bit of a mistake. For example, with this is looking a bit too blue for my liking. And what I did was I took a sample from this rock. I'm just curious. I'm going to come back to RGB so you can see the blue curve and the red curve. And I'm going to sample around this rock in different areas. Did you see the settings change slightly? And as I keep on sampling different parts of the rock, my color balance changes because I looked at the rock and I said, that is rock. Rock is grey. Therefore, I can use that to take my white balance readings from. Especially because I was born and raised in this countryside, I know what the rocks look like. I made an assumption about what rock is, and everyone does this. You see some rock, and unless it's a sandstone cliff in Monument Valley, you think it's rock, rock is grey, therefore I can use it to set my white balance. It's not true. I got it wrong because I went down with a slight dose of assumptionitis. Now, the good thing is, it's digital, so here's the miracle cure, the reset button. Instead, I'll try and do this manually. You have heard me banging on about how it's a good idea to sort out the dark and light of your picture before you sort out the color balance. This holds true for curves as well. If you are using your curves to sort out the tone and the color balance, do the tone first. So I'll put a point and I will drop down the values. And yeah, I quite like that. It's already making an improvement. I'm not sure I want quite so much darkening in the darker tone, so I'll raise that up slightly like this. Maybe I'll try dropping down the top end of the curve a little bit more to bring out just a little bit more detail in the lighter parts of his t-shirt and also the cloud areas. I don't want to overdo it because there will come a certain point where I'll start to even out the tones in this portion of the curve, and I'm starting to get some rather dead grey areas. Look at the highlights in the boy's hair. That is not a good look. I'll bring it back up. Curves can give you precise controls, but they can't do miracles. I'll go with that for now. I may come back and tweak it. Now, what about, well, the red channel? I want to take a look at that because those rocks are definitely too warm. And if I come back to my, what would you call it, finger selector icon? I'm sure there's a proper name for it. If I come down and look at some of the shadowy areas, I'm doing it again, aren't I? I've gone down with another dose of assumptionitis. Did you catch what I just said? I said I'll come down to these shadowy areas. I'm looking at the rock and I can see bits of it are in shadow, so I said, therefore that rock is in shadow. And if it's in shadow, it's darker. But look, you can see when I move my tone picker around, can you see that little red dot bouncing up and down my curve line? This is much more mid-tones than shadow areas. That was another dose of assumptionitis that I went down with. Well, okay, I'm going to choose an area, say this area here, which is a little bit more shadowy, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag down. Look at that, I dragged down by just a tiny amount, and already I'm getting a large difference. Can you see what's happening with the curve? That's just gone down ever so slightly from the mid-control line, and yet already I'm getting a big difference in the color balance of those rocks. Trust me, you can use curves to make some pretty sweeping changes, but when it comes to something like this, that tiny little amount we just did there did the job. Now I'm looking at those clouds and I think there's a little bit too much green in those clouds. So I will come to my green channel. I have my tone selector button there selected. If I come up to the clouds area, yeah, you can see, if you look at the curve, can you see that little circle wobbling around as I try and choose various different points? We're definitely going to be affecting the upper tones on the green curve. I'm not sure I want to affect the tones of the darker areas though. And so what I will do is I will come down and I'll put an anchor point at 50% and I'll put another anchor point at 25%. When you do this, do you notice that I clicked, and if there is a way to click on the curve without slightly dragging it off to one side or up or down at the same time, I would like to know about it. Luckily, because I'm aiming to do it around the 25% mark, I have the 25% guidelines to help me lock it in place. Okay, so I have my 2 anchor points, which is generally what you need if you're going to put down anchor points. And let's come to the clouds and drag down slightly to take some of the green out of those clouds. And ooh, yes. Again, it's just a small amount, but those clouds are suddenly getting some of the green out of there, which is affecting the blue of the sky. I'm getting much more of a kind of china blue. It's one of those things I didn't realize that the sky was a little bit green until I started to take some green out of it. And if I keep on dragging down, I start to get pink fluffy clouds. Now at that point you might be thinking, well, what's going on? You're working on the green channel. Well, think about that. This picture is made up of a green channel, a red channel, and a blue channel. And if I start taking out green from the upper tones of my picture, it means that by comparison, the red channel and the blue channel are going to get more dominant. And so if you're mixing light and you mix together the red and the blue channels, you end up with magenta. So that pink is actually an increase in the amount of magenta. Now, pink fluffy clouds might be your thing, I don't know. But instead, I'm going to make this more subtle. It was about there, wasn't it? Now, what about those rocks down there? I'm going to try lowering the mid anchor point down a little bit to try and take a little bit of green out of the mid-tone areas. Just a little bit. And I think the picture works better for that. That is one thing about anchor points. You'll set them to control your curve. That doesn't mean you can't change them afterwards. You can see the very darker parts of my picture, which I didn't want affected, still aren't affected, but I managed to improve things just a little bit by dragging down this midpoint on the green channel just a little bit. Okay, so let's come back to the tone, which is a composite of the red, green and blue channels. And I think, yeah, I'm happy enough with that. I will close my dialog box, and now the moment of truth. Have I done this picture any good whatsoever by adding my curves layer? And before, ooh, not nice. I didn't quite realize what problems there were with this picture until I corrected them. Yeah, the curves have made things much better. And I got to control the tone, the dark to light of the picture, and the color balance of the picture in the darker and lighter areas separately, or by using curves. They are precise. They give you a great amount of control. And for the longest time, they were regarded as the most precise tools you've got. Okay, that is the principle of curves plus a practical example. If you found this video useful, there's 24 more hours of useful stuff when you click on the link below and enroll on the course, where you'll get all the photos you need to follow along with, plus exercises, plus a PDF document which gives you notes on all the videos so that you don't have to make notes yourself. So click on the link. And also you may want to hit the subscribe button so that you can catch any new videos I post on this channel. Okay, I'll see you soon.